The story is begin from here. Alicia Melfin thought the imperial city, 500th anniversary of the founding of the Luthen's Empire. After 10 agonizing years, the moment has finally arrived. Years and years of waiting, all for this day. They looked her, and she thought, behold, people of Luthen's. Alicia Melfin sit, and said, my house stands tall and proud yet. Alicia Melfin looked prettier and said, witness the return of Alicia Melfin. Alicia Melfin thought a temperate climate, fertile lands, a prosperous estate where every soul thrives. Ours is an illustrious bloodline that has produced countless renowned knights through the ages. When they all are together and servants hold a cup of tea, and she thought my parents were the most prominent and respected aristocrats in the western reaches. And with a dependable brother and his wife, who was a ray of sunlight for us. Alicia Melfin joy and thought our family was my pride and joy. Father looked her and thought and I should not forget to mention the new addition my father brought into the family one fine morning. Father said she'll be living here with us from now on. Alicia Melfin had a sister, Ophelia. She thought a beautiful girl blessed with divine powers. Ophelia. Getting her ready, Alicia Melfin thought I was overjoyed to have a new sister and friend to keep me company. Ophelia said her, you look so good with that Teresia flower wreath. Alicia, it's like you were born to wear it. Alicia Melfin thought life was perfect, and the goddess Mara seemed to be smiling upon us. They all are together, and she thought, I believe that our happiness would last forever. That is, until the dark clouds of misfortune came to cast their shadow on us. Nix came, and she thought when she looked him everything started with the arrival of that boy Nix. Alicia Melfin said him I was suspicious of him from the start. There was something deeply unsettling in his gaze. She looked them and said Ophelia, however, treated him with nothing but kindness. And my objections did not stop her from bringing him into our home. That was the Holy Maiden's one and only mistake. She also said that wherever Ophelia went, Nix would follow. Nix smiled and looked her. She thought even though the signs were clear. Nix grabbed her hand and she said I was too blinded by my dislike of him to realize that the object of his obsession was not Ophelia herself but her divine power. He smiled and said the young wanderer Nix, he thought, turned out to be a corrupt priest who had fallen into the worship of Arpho, the Dark One. And Ophelia's divine power was the key to awakening this dark god from his slumber. Nix's purpose was to extract Ophelia's divine essence for the Dark One. And when he failed to do so, he unleashed the hellish powers of his god upon our estate instead. Thousands were sacrificed in the ritual, including my family. Father shouted and said, Alicia, run! Alicia Melfin looked him and shouted and said everything I had ever cherished was taken away from me in the blink of an eye. Alicia Melfin said when I awoke. Alicia Melfin saw her nephew and said I found myself in a vast and empty estate. Alone with my baby nephew Alfred. Alicia Melfin also said when he crying that she looked a ring and thought that's father's signet ring. She thought that day I made a vow. Alicia Melfin hugged her nephew and said I promised myself to do whatever it would take to survive. And bring back House Melfin from the ruins. And once I'd restored our name. Alfred, my only surviving blood, would wear this ring and continue our legacy. She saw her sister Ophelia and said as for Ophelia, the root cause of such tragedy. Alicia Melfin also said the one who had left her adopted sister to die alone. Well, I'll simply say that the fiery hatred and resentment I had for her. Alicia Melfin strange, and said shaped me into who one am today. Alicia Melfin said coward. Alicia Melfin looked the glass and said to accomplish my ambitions, I cast aside my pride as a highborn and entered the world of trade as a water cold drinks. Alicia Melfin said while she looked a cold drink glass and through my tireless work, I managed to restore House Melfin in just 10 years. They looked her. And he said, look at the size of the jewels she's wearing. It must have cost a fortune. Other replied him, yes, a fortune that which amassed by selling wine. And she calls herself nobility? Ha! Alicia Melfin turned and glanced them. Alicia Melfin smiled and said, my lords, do visit us at Ramdak when you have the time. Our guild's jewelry is normally reserved for the imperial family, but I'll let you browse our goods free of charge. Alicia Melfin said him, since I doubt you have the money to buy them. Alicia Melfin shouted and thought whispered behind my back, all you like. Dignity of the nobility? Such things are not meant for me. After all, I am simply paving the way. She went and thought for my dear nephew Alfred until he can rule on his own. She strange and shouted and thought him, all these fireworks. What a waste of money. They should rethink how they use our taxes. Alicia Melfant shouted and said Arg. Alicia Melfant fell down and shouted and said an explosion? What's happening? There is no time to waste. I have to get out of this place. This feeling. It can't be. No. Nyx came and she/her while she looked him angrily. Alicia Melfant. It's been too long. Nyx looked her and said, so you survived after all? You're a stubborn one, Alicia Melfant. Alicia Melfant shouted and thought Nyx, curse you. Alicia Melfant said I could say the same to you. I heard the clerics of the temple sealed you away the same day you slaughtered my people. Alicia Melfant fell on the ground and said, but it seems you managed to sneak out like the little stalker you are. And here I thought your corpse was safely rotting away in a dungeon. Shame. Nyx replied her ha, still as sharp-tongued as ever. I see. Nyx also asked her anyhow, where is she? Where are you hiding her? Alicia Melfant replied, what are you talking about? Nyx asked Ophelia. She's here, yes? Alicia Melfant shouted and thought, sick bastard. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, he had to bring up Ophelia. Great. I need to think of a way to stall him here. Alicia Melfant said until the clerics arrived. Pathetic fool. You really don't know a thing, do you? Alicia Melfant glad and said Ophelia died that day. Nyx strange and thought, did it work? Nyx said her lies. Alicia Melfant shouted and said no. He raised a lightning and she fell down. He, thought Ophelia, to think my life would be in danger again because of you. Damn you, Ophelia! Alicia Melfant said him keep an eye on the wench and wait for Master Nyx's orders. Alicia Melfant opened her eyes and thought, where am I? What will become of me now? I cannot die here. I have little Alfred to think of. And my wine business. Get up, Alicia Melfant. Alicia Melfant became strange and thought, there are people waiting for you. Come to your senses. Alicia Melfant rised up and asked what's happening. She thought am1. In a dream? Alicia Melfant glanced and said I must have fainted. She looked a beautiful book and she asked a book? Alicia Melfant picked a book and said so. A book floating on a pond, huh? What's next? Alicia Melfant saw and thought. Ophelia's Night. Alicia Melfant said I can already tell that this isn't going to be a light-hearted story. She opened the book and said the novel was titled Ophelia's Night. But strangely enough, it was the story of my life that I found within its pages. Alicia Melfant said it's about me. Nyx smiled and said with each turn of the page, the book revealed the terrible truth of what really happened that night. Alicia Melfant said when Nyx unleashed death and decay upon the Melfant estate, Ophelia wasted no time and rushed to the rescue of little Alfred. She then headed straight to her sister Alicia, but by the time she reached her, the girl's lifeblood had already been harvested for the Dark One. Alicia Melfant said the memory's still hazy, but it's coming back to me. She thought that demonic hand got me, and for a few seconds there, Alicia Melfant thought that I was dead. Alicia Melfant explained about her sister that Ophelia poured most of her power into bringing Alicia back to life. And with the last vestiges of her divine essence, she sealed away the fallen priest Nyx. With the herald of the Dark One imprisoned, peace seemed to be within reach. 10 years later, however, Nyx's remaining followers devised a way to free their master from his chains, and the servant of Arfo was awakened from his long sleep. Nyx thought that once again, Nyx set out in search of Ophelia. Alicia Melfant said while read a book and said then, did Nyx come to the capital because he sensed Ophelia's divine power within me? Alicia Melfant also said that explains why he was asking me about her. If I can somehow harness her power, I could deal him a significant blow. But how do I do that? Alicia Melfant said I should keep reading. There might be more clues in the book. It didn't take me long to realize that I was neglecting a very important fact. Alicia Melfant asked, what's this? That title should not be overlooked because, undoubtedly, the protagonist of this story, Ophelia's Night, was not Alicia but Ophelia. After shaking the Imperial forces off his trail, Nyx traveled to a distant corner of the realm and built for himself a fell citadel named Tantaros. He then sought to lure Ophelia into his lair. By sending Alicia to her point one piece at a time. And when Ophelia finally answered the grim invitation, Ophelia came and shouted and said him no. Nyx! Stop it! Nyx smiled and said I thank you, Alicia Melfant. It was your desperate grip on life that brought the holy maiden here today. She thought. Nyx slit Alicia's throat before her very eyes. Alicia Melfin said, "What's this supposed to mean? Am I fated to die here?" Alicia Melfin shouted while reading a book and said, "I won't accept it. Ophelia gave me her divine essence. I can't be killed so easily." She turned the page and thought, "I should be able to heal any wounds if I put this power to use." Ophelia thought the moment Nyx's blade slashed through Alicia's flesh. The divine essence that had been keeping her alive for 10 years returned to its owner. Imbuing Ophelia with an even greater power in body, mind, and spirit. Armed with righteous might and anger, Ophelia sealed away the fallen priest for good this time. Thwarting the return of Arfo, the Dark One. So ends the tale of Ophelia. She take a sword and thought, favored of Mara and savior of mankind. Alicia Melfin stand with hold a book and thought, "What are you trying to tell me?" Alicia Melfin poured out and start weeping and said, "You want me to die so Ophelia can have her happy ending?" Alicia Melfin read book and said, "You want me to die so Ophelia can have her happy ending?" Alicia Melfin strange and said, "No, I won't accept this." Alicia Melfin said, "This is just a bad dream that'll soon be over." Alicia Melfin became very angry and said, "I've got to wake up from this nightmare. Alfred is waiting for me. The people of House Melfin need me. Wake up already." Alicia Melfin looked surprised. Alicia Melfin said, "Why can't I wake up? Isn't this supposed to be a dream?" Alicia Melfin shouted and said, "A stronghold built in a wasteland away from the scrutiny of Imperial forces. Help. Let us out." She shouted and thought, "They're keeping prisoners here as sacrifices for the dark god." Alicia Melfin looked strange and thought, "May Arfo's dark embrace guide your souls into the depths of hell. Nyx's twisted chants make it even worse. So this is Tantaro's, Nyx's lair." Alicia Melfin became sad and said, "I suppose his lackeys forged these chains as well." Alicia Melfin said, "It's almost funny how everything is happening just like the book said it would." She looked and thought, "Wait a minute. Does that mean?" Alicia Melfin angered and thought, "I'm going to die here?" Alicia Melfin became very upset and thought, "I can't give up yet. There has to be a way out. If what the book says is true, Ophelia's divine power is coursing through my veins even now." Alicia Melfin looked her hand and smiled and thought, "Once I can figure out how to put it to use, escaping this stronghold will be a piece of cake. Maybe I'll even get to wield this power." Alicia Melfin said, "To deal a blow to that bastard Nyx. He'll pay for what he's done to House Melfin." Nyx asked, "Is this the wench's cell?" Alicia Melfin replied, "Yes." Alicia Melfin looked the chain and shouted and said, Think. How did Ophelia summon her powers?" Alicia Melfin shouted and thought, "Damn it! I need to do something before they take me." Alicia Melfin thought, "Help me, Ophelia." Knights locked and said, "Where's that sound coming from?" Arfo must have answered Master Nyx's prayers. "At long last, the Lord of Hell shall walk this land." Alicia Melfin said, "Let's take the girl to Master Nyx. We shouldn't keep him waiting." Knight said her out, "Woman." Alicia Melfin said, "Him can't wait to see hell on earth, can you? Then I'll give you one." She shouted and said, "Argy, incredible. So it's true. Her power was lying dormant within me all along." To the writer who wasted a pathetic amount of paper on Ophelia's night, "You're mistaken if you think I'm going to quietly accept the ending you wrote. Just you wait, because no amount of ink or paper can save your book. From the mayhem I'm about to unleash." Alicia Melfin also thought that was a bit too effective. I went crashing through all the floors with just a single fall. For now, let's focus on getting out of here in one piece. Alfred is waiting for me. Think, Alicia, think. Knight shouted and pointed towards her, the wench. After her, Alicia Melfin said, "Ugh." "Ah." Alicia Melfin glanced and said, "I swear, this dress." Alicia Melfin said him, "What are those idiots doing there?" "Aha! My power must have formed a barrier to keep them away." She smiled and said, "Good. This morsel of cloth will be the only thing you'll get from me." Knight shouted and said, "Coward! Get out here." Thunk. Alicia Melfin said, "Your power saved me again, Ophelia." Alicia Melfin smiled and said, "But I won't be thanking you for it." Alicia Melfin said, "Well, then," she said, "let me ask you something. Idiots." Alicia Melfin also said, "Why on earth would anyone want to be lackeys for Arfi? Or wait, was it Arfo? It's not like he's sharing his powers with you, right?" Knights replied, "Blasphemy." He said, "Watch your tongue, wench." Alicia Melfin said, "The Dark One shall judge you." Alicia Melfin looked her hand and thought, "How did I pull that off, though?" I activated the power without knowing how to do it. It pains me to admit, but the only way to get out of here is to use the information in the novel to my advantage. She also thought that things are playing out just like the book foretold. After all, Alicia Melfin thought about the Nyx according to the novel. There is a spring at the end of this tunnel. That serves as the prison of a paladin powerful enough to throw the world into disarray. Norman Diaz is his name. Ophelia thought that in the original plot, Ophelia uses the power she regained after my death. To free the paladin from his watery confinement. I'm going to beat her to it, and use him to escape this place. Alicia Melfin glared and shouted. Speaking of which, Alicia Melfin thought, I don't see any pond or spring large enough to keep a grown man submerged. She shouted and asked, what was that? Alicia Melfin said. Alicia Melfin looked and strange and thought, there it is, the spring of sealing. Alicia Melfin said, though it looks more like a shallow pool than a spring. Alicia Melfin also said, I should probably take a look. Alicia Melfin looked her wound and said, it's deeper than it looks, but the water still only reaches up to my ankles. Alicia Melfin said, huh? Alicia Melfin fell into the water and said, no. Alicia Melfin shouted and thought, darn it, I should have known there would be a catch. Nyx came, and she looked and thought, it's him. Nyx thought Norman Diaz. She thought, Nyx, that twisted pervert. I wonder if he kept Norman here for his looks. Alicia Melfin shocked and thought, this is the first time I've laid my eyes on someone so unbelievably beautiful. Alicia Melfin surprised and thought, while she looked him, he's still so young. It's as if time itself had been frozen. The moment the curse was placed upon him, Alicia Melfin said, in that instant, my plans to use him were completely forgotten, and I found myself acting on pure instinct alone. Alicia Melfin thought, in that instant, my plans to use him were completely forgotten, and I found myself acting on pure instinct alone. Alicia Melfin picked him and looked aggressive and thought, anyway, she shouted and thought, I'll need to set him free first. They both were fell down, and she thought, I really need to work on my stamina. Can't save anyone if I'm gasping for air after a little swim. Alicia Melfin said, I almost dumped you back in there, let me tell you. You're ridiculously heavy. She looked shocked and thought, wait, Alicia Melfin come closed him and touched and looked that he's not dead, is he? Alicia Melfin smiles and said, he looks just like a sleeping princess under a spell. Or should I say prince? Alicia Melfin said him Sir Norman. Alicia Melfin said him that my name is Alicia of House Melfin, and I am in dire need of your help. Please wake up. We can't stay here long. Alicia Melfin picked him and shouted and said, listen here, princess. You need to wake up before that crazed demon worshipper finds me. Nyx said her. Alicia Melfin. Alicia Melfin turned and looked him and shocked for the love of Nyx asked from her, where did you hide, Ophelia? Alicia Melfin looked him and said, what are you talking about? Alicia Melfin also asked, did you forget? I already told you Ophelia's dead. He said her, no, you're lying. I sense her power. He picked her from arm and she thought, coursing through you still. She shouted and thought, sick bastard. Alicia Melfin also thought he must have sensed Ophelia's power. When I activated it to get down here. Nyx said him? Alicia Melfin asked, is that Norman Diaz? How did you manage to set him free? Nyx laughed and said, it wasn't you, was it? No. Nyx also smiled and said her, it was Ophelia. She must have come here to free Norman. Eat that. Alicia Melfin slapped him on his face. Alicia Melfin said, eat that. Alicia Melfin also said him, that was the divine power you can't get enough of. Alicia Melfin became angry and said, after sealing you away that day, Ophelia used up her last remaining power to bring me back to life. She also said, I am now the bearer of her legacy. Nyx shouted and said, no. Impossible. Nyx became very angry and shouted, no, 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 no. Gyurg. Alicia Melfin strange and thought, that's it. Now you know how it feels. The same despair I had to go through. Nyx shouted and said her evil, conniving **re. Ophelia's power is not meant for the likes of you. Alicia Melfin said him, too bad. You couldn't kill me even if you wanted to. Because, you see, that would mean saying goodbye to the precious power you're so smitten with. Nyx hid his face and loudly said her, I don't believe you. Ophelia is the goddess's chosen one. She couldn't have died so easily. Nyx grabbed her from her leg and said her, liar. You deceived me. Alicia Melfin shouted and asked, you're still saying that after tasting my divine power through that blow? Nix said her slay the human girl, and Ophelia shall return. Nix touch her face and said her, you hear that? That's the voice of my god Arfo. All I need to do is end you, and everything will revert back to the way it was. He also said her, you have no idea what that power can accomplish. All that precious energy leaking out of you. It proves you're an unworthy vessel. Nix shouted and said her, die, Alicia Melfant. Perish in fear and pain. She looked strange and said him, no, Nix. Thought I didn't come all this way to die like this. Alicia Melfant thought, I don't want to die. Not like this. Nix said, arg. Alicia Melfant said, ha. Alicia Melfant shouted and asked, what's happening? Norman asked from her, you're safe now. Norman Diaz. Alicia Melfant and Norman rised and she looked and taught a holy barrier. Nix fell and shocked and thought that explains why Nix was repelled. Nix said her, come to me. Alicia Melfant. Nix came her and said her, you cannot escape me. Alicia Melfant thought, I hear his voice inside my head. Nix thought, no matter where you flee, you're bound to return to me. Alicia Melfant shouted and said, go yourself. Nix said her, I'm giving you a chance to offer your unsullied flesh to the Dark One. Alicia Melfant strange and shouted, that freak. So he was after my body all this time? Norman looked her and asked, did that man try to harm you? Alicia Melfant replied, yes. He's a fallen priest who butchered and sacrificed everyone in the Melfant estate for his god Arfo. Alicia Melfant said him, we cannot let him live. Norman asked her, are you a daughter of House Melfant? Alicia Melfant said, I was. Once. But now I'm the head of my house. Being the only survivor didn't leave me much of a choice. Nix said, fool. She shouted, he almost shattered the barrier. Alicia Melfant said, please, don't let him kill me. Norman said, I'm ashamed to say this, but there is nothing I can do to destroy that thing at the moment. Norman said her, however, I may be able to buy us sometime. Nix said when they are looked him, Norman Diaz. Give up already. That lousy barrier won't save you. Nix lauded and said, I shall rend you limb from limb and offer your blood to the Dark One. Alicia Melfant shouted, is this the end? Nix said, Gyurg. Norman released a lights from his hand and said, a holy knight with the power to upset the very balance of the world. Norman Diaz. As one of the characters from the novel who foretells my death. Alicia Melfant looked him and thought this man.is both a reminder of the perilous future that awaits me, and death will come no matter what you do. Alicia Melfant. Alicia Melfant shocked and said, that's not true. And I won't wait for death to come and claim me. Alicia Melfant thought, you're no more than a temporary vessel of Ophelia's divine power. Norman looked her with strange and said her, is he speaking inside your mind? He's trying to weaken you by instilling fear into your soul. You have to resist him. Norman put his hand on her shoulders and said her, I know you're strong enough to do so. You're the hero who freed me from that seal. After all. Norman also said her, you can survive this. Norman said her, forgive my lack of courtesy, but we must hurry. Norman glanced her and said, I will get you out of here alive. I swear it. Alicia Melfant thought, may Arfo's dark embrace guide your souls into the depths of hell. Ophelia thought, may Arfo's dark embrace guide your souls into the depths of hell. Ophelia rise up when he came her and said, Ophelia. Nicholas Diaz said her, you're awake. How are you feeling, Nicholas Diaz, second son of House Diaz. Ophelia looked him and asked Nicholas, how long was I out for? How many days have passed since the festival? Nicholas said her, it hasn't even been a day. Don't worry. Nix couldn't get his hands on what he came for. Nicholas Diaz picked her and said, there is still time. He won't be killing Alicia just yet. Ophelia shouted, I blacked out when I was needed the most. How pathetic of me. Knight said her, I believe we've gathered enough leads to track him down. We'll locate his lair while you rest. Ophelia looked him and said, there's no time for that. We must leave now. Nicholas Diaz said him, but we don't know where exactly he's holed up. She said, Tantaros. Nicholas asked from him, Tantaros. Do we know where that is? Knight replied, no, Captain. Can't say I've heard the name before. Ophelia said, I can't explain it, but the name and location of his citadel suddenly appeared in my mind. Nicholas Diaz shouted and thought, Ophelia's hunch is never wrong. If this, Tantaros, is indeed Nix's base of operation, that's where I'll likely come across more clues on Norman's whereabouts. Norman smiled and said, Nicholas. And who knows, he might just be waiting for me. Captain. Nicholas said, prepare to depart, Jack. Jack said at once, Captain. Norman take her and thought we're flying. Alicia Melfin glared and shouted and thought am I in a dream? Norman said close your eyes for a moment. She shouted I can't do that with you being so close. Norman asked her are you hurt anywhere? Alicia Melfin replied him I think I'm fine. Alicia Melfin shocked and thought I was so focused on surviving that I completely forgot I was attacked by Nyx's unholy power. Nyx grabbed her strongly while she think that monster ruined everything. Norman shouted and said my lady. He shouted and said it hurts. I can't breathe. Did I survive all those odds only to die in a place like this? Norman shouted and said please, pull yourself together. Norman hugged her and picked her and shouted she's hyperventilating from the shock. Alicia Melfin said I won't let you perish here. I promise. Norman said her I'm sorry if this seems inappropriate. Norman asked from her are you feeling better? Alicia Melfin replied am I still alive? Norman smiled and said yes. As alive as can be. Alicia Melfin looked her hands and said, Alicia Melfin shouted the course of events changed. Nyx failed to kill me. Alicia Melfin hugged him and shouted and said I was so afraid, but I made it out alive. I did it. Norman happy and said that's right, and you're safe now. All will be well. Alicia Melfin hugged him and tears appears out, and she shouted you cannot defy death forever. Alicia Melfin. Will I be able to break free of that tragic ending for good? Norman said her please. Rest your head on my shoulder for a bit. Alicia Melfin said for now. Sleep is what you need. Nicholas said meanwhile. The citadel of Tantaros. The whole place is in ruins. What do you think happened here? Knight said Captain. Knight said him we found the heretic priest. He lies crushed under the rubble. Ophelia said him send for the clerics of the temple. He must be sealed with all haste. Ophelia said lead the way. We'll know for certain once Nyx is safely sealed away. Ophelia shouted and thought I can't put my finger on it. But something has changed. Norman makes lightning and also fire. Norman said the view hasn't changed at all. He looked her and thought now I'm the head of my house. Being the only survivor didn't leave me much of a choice. Norman said, even though the world was shaken to the core while I was asleep. He thought I can't even imagine how they must have suffered. He shouted and said Norman. No. Norman said I am to blame for all that's happened. He said. Norman Diaz Zoe. That's my name. He thought that name. Zoe. A God-given name shared only within the family. It is the name I revealed to a fellow paladin, a comrade and a dear friend who faced countless perils with me. Norman said I'm telling you this because I consider you a brother, Iago. Norman also said to me, your family? And yet, even though we had been fighting together, as heroes of the Empire, Norman asked why Iago. Nicholas said, come now, O death! Shatter and scatter the soul of mine enemy Norman Diaz Zoe! I was blind to the hatred concealed deep within his heart. Using our secret, Iago cast an ancient curse that required the true and last name of the victim. Norman said don't do this, Iago. Curses always exact a heavy price on the caster. Nicholas said I hated you from the moment we first met. Everything will be perfect without you, Norman. Cast into the fathomless darkness of the curse, I hated you from the moment we first met. Alfred shouted and said him don't leave me, Norman. Everything will be perfect without you. All I could do was helplessly wait for the end. Alicia Melfin said him I don't want to die, until her voice reached out to me. Norman shouted and said not like this. Alicia Melfin said her HRK. NNGH. Alicia Melfin shouted and thought she's burning up. Norman surprised and thought I shouldn't be relying too much on this power, but there's no other choice. Norman also strange and thought when she was with him she's in shock, both body and mind. It's to be expected after everything she's been through. Norman surprised and thought she pulled me out of that lake with all these wounds on her, and I'm not exactly on the lighter side either. Norman looked and asked is it fear of death that gave her the strength to go on? Or should I say, her will to live, such a strong desire to survive. Now I wonder what kind of person she is. Perhaps I can learn more about her once she wakes up. I can't remember the last time I was this excited. To see what tomorrow has in store. Alicia Melfin thought. All of this was possible thanks to Alicia's sacrifice. Alicia Melfin hid her arms with hands and said my arms are still here. Alicia Melfin looked her hands and said, I'm not dead. Alicia Melfin smiled and said, I'm still alive, that darned. SHE, said HMM. She looked with surprise at bed. Alicia Melfin thought, I remember escaping Tantaros, but the rest is all fuzzy. Alicia Melfin shouted. I can't remember anything else. Alicia Melfin asked and thought, where am I? What is this place? Norman opened the door and held a basket of apples and said, Hooray, I'm back. Alicia Melfin asked, Who are you? Norman sparked and dropped the basket of apples from his hand. Alicia Melfin grabbed him and shouted and said, Don't think you can fool me. Tell me who you really are. He said her, I'm just an old man. Norman said her, Calm down, my lady. These people have been kind enough to let us stay here free of charge. Alicia Melfin glanced him angrily and asked, That sounds even more suspicious. Why would they do that when they have nothing to gain? Old man said her, Your clothes were in tatters. We could tell right away you didn't have any money on you. Alicia Melfin thought, I don't know what you're talking about. Matching earring lost Granny's dressing gown. The signet ring she mustn't sell. Barefoot Alicia's belongings penniless. Alicia Melfin shouted, My silk dress and jewels. Norman said her, My apologies. Norman also said her, It's quite all right. Norman smiled and thought, Thank you for being so understanding. She's been through a lot and isn't her usual polite self. They both. Old man said, What a kind-hearted young man you are. Norman said her, That must have been quite a shock for you. Norman looked her and said her, You woke up sooner than I thought. I should have returned earlier and explained. He also said her, In any case, I'm glad to see you back on your feet. Alicia Melfin looked her arm and shocked and thought, The wounds are all gone. Alicia Melfin looked him and asked, How did I recover so quickly? She also asked, It's your divine power, isn't it? Norman said her, You must be hungry. I went foraging in the forest nearby since we had no money to buy provisions. He take one apple. AMD said, You are here. It's safe to eat. He picked an apples and asked, Sir Norman? He replied, Yes, my lady. Alicia shocked and said, Who? She asked, Who put me in this gown while I was asleep? Norman said her, The old lady, of course. Your dress was all wet and muddy. She thought, Oh, I see. She said also. Alicia Melfin surprised and said, How much time has passed since we escaped? Where are we exactly? I really need to know. Norman thought, What became of Nyx after Tantaros fell? Norman asked. Nyx? She said, Yes, the scrawny priest who battled you. Nyx is his name. Alicia Melfin also said, I'd like a short but detailed account of what happened. Norman said, Well, he thought Nyx took the full brunt of a blow suffused with divine power. He'll probably remain paralyzed for at least a couple of weeks, or even a month, if not longer. Norman said, Such a shame I couldn't finish him off while I had the chance. Being sealed for so long drained much of my powers. Norman smiled and thought happily, It's really intimidating when you say it with that sweet smile. Norman said her, You fell asleep and didn't wake up for 2 days, after we escaped the citadel. Alicia Melfin thought, Fell asleep. I thought I had passed out. Norman's also thought I carried you through the forest until we stumbled upon this village. I believe they call this place Thule. Alicia Melfin said, Thule? That's a frontier village located between the Imperial City and the eastern reaches. I see you know your maps. That's really not far from the Ramdak Guild headquarters. I should be able to find my way back quite easily. Norman said her, By the way, my lady, I'd been meaning to ask. Alicia Melfin said him, Go on. Norman said, How did you? Norman looked her and asked, How did you know it was me in that lake? Norman said her, I feel so lost. He said, You're my rescuer. But I haven't the slightest idea who you are or why you had to free me from that spring. Alicia Melfin thought, I can't just say I read about him in a dream. That'll just sound absurd. Alicia Melfin looked Apple and said, I only heard that the firstborn son of House Diaz had gone missing a long time ago. She also said, And when I found you sealed under that spring in Tantaros, I just had this gut feeling that you were him. Norman looked surprised and said, Then do you happen to know the reason why Nyx abducted you and had me sealed away? Alicia Melfin told Apple and said, He aims to become the disciple of Arfo, the Dark One. Alicia Melfin explained that thousands of years ago, Arfo unleashed the 7 mortal sins upon the world, and humans began slaughtering one another with their newfound blasphemous powers. Seeing her beloved children on the brink of extinction, Mara, the goddess of life and maker of the world who breathed her divine essence into humans, smote the evil one, and sealed him away. The goddess then bound and contained Arfo's fell curses within the pages of a secret tome to banish them from the memories of her children. Humans took the tome deep into a temple to keep it hidden there till the end of time. However, Nyx, a priest blessed with strong divine powers, was able to approach the forbidden tome with relative ease. Nyx said them be free in hatred. Curse your enemies. That is the only path that leads to true liberation. Arfo's cursed magic and the control it gave over others was a temptation too sweet to resist for Nyx, a mere cleric who aspired for divinity. Nyx smiled and thought after defeating Norman, Nyx had the paladin sealed away in his lair as a trophy to commemorate his first deed as Arfo's new servant. Alicia Melfant shouted and thought, I like to think of myself as someone who values honesty, but even I can't say to his face that he was a demon's living trophy. Alicia Melfant looked and said, using his divine powers, Nyx sealed you and your curse away and came to the Melfant estate. This isn't a white lie. Alicia Melfant closed her eyes and said he was still a cleric of Mara up to that point. Nyx thought, this is an untold backstory that I know because I read the novel. It wasn't until he sacrificed the people of the Melfant estate that he was granted the full power of darkness. A disturbing tale I never wanted to learn about. Alicia Melfant said Nyx was defeated by Ophelia in the end, but his followers brought him back. And the very first thing he did after waking up was abduct me and bring me to his lair. Norman looked shocked and said, I'm sorry for your loss. Alicia Melfant slightly smiled and asked, it was all in the past. Did that help you make more sense of things? Norman replied, yes. Thank you. Norman said, so much happened during the past 10 years. She thought the master of the house told me that this year marks the 500th anniversary of the founding of the Luthen's Empire. Norman said, Nicholas must be a grown man by now. I feel bad for making him worry for all these years. Norman also laughed and said, Nicholas is my dearest little brother. Alicia Melfant so strange and said, Nicholas Diaz. I saw him at some soirees. Norman said her, so you've met him before? How is he doing? Alicia Melfant smiled and said, he's doing well for himself. Why wouldn't he be? He's courting Ophelia. Very much so. She also said that you'll be surprised to see what an arrogant prick he's become. To see just how much he's grown. Norman became very glad and said, I can't wait. I'm so relieved to hear that. Alicia Melfant smiled and said sure. I'm happy for you. Norman said her, by the way, my lady, I don't think I've asked for your name yet. Alicia Melfant smiled and replied, allow me to properly introduce myself, then. I am Alicia, head of House Melfant and leader of the Ramdak Traders Guild. Servant came ans said her while she hold a letter for you, Miss Melfant estate. Erica, Alicia's secretary. Erica take the ladder and start read, and she said, on behalf of the paladins. Nicholas looked when knights go away unhorsed, and he thought I'd provide the lords of the realm with the latest developments concerning the cult responsible for spreading unrest in Luthens of late. He also thought during our expedition to the western borders of the realm, we were able to locate Tantaros, the lair of the heresiarch, Nyx. Inside, we discovered that the heretics had been slaughtering abducted citizens as sacrifices for Arfo, the Dark One. Tantaros was already in ruins due to a mysterious attack by the time we arrived, and the clerics of the temple promptly took the incapacitated Nyx into custody, to seal him away once again. Unfortunately, the whereabouts of the lady abducted during the festival still remain unknown. Some of Nyx's followers have managed to evade capture, so we advise you to avoid any contact with proselytizers of dubious religious beliefs. Erica looked the servant and said her. Signed, Nicholas Diaz, representative of the paladins. Servant strange and asked, what should we make of this? Erica said her, well, now we know Lady Alicia wasn't in the citadel when it collapsed. Servant said then, Erica also said either she had been killed and disposed of before the paladins arrived. Erica turned, looked, and said, or she managed to escape with her life. Alicia Melfant having breakfast. Norman similed and said, let me go get you something warm to drink. Alicia Melfant turned and looked him and shoutly thought the novel doesn't go into much detail about him. I had no idea that he could be so. Norman said her, you have to resist him. Norman came her and said, I know you're strong enough to do so. You're the hero who freed me from that seal, after all. Norman hugged her and said, I will get you out of here alive. I swear. Alicia Melfant thought while having something and sweet. The novel, How. Alicia Melfin thought the first day I was abducted from the festival grounds and thrown into that dungeon cell in Tantaros, and for the next 2 days, I was out cold. Which means 3 days have passed since I left the Melfin estate. I used what little time I had to defy the book's plot and ensure my survival. But I still don't know whether this'll be enough to change my ultimate tragic ending. But one thing's for certain. Alicia Melfin having cake with fork and shouted and thought the longer I delay my return, the closer my nephew comes to danger. She thought Cousin Gale will definitely try to replace me as the conservator of little Alfred's assets. He's had his eye on the Melfin fortune since before Alfred's parents were hit. Not to mention that imbecile fiancé of mine, Philip Morfolk. I know he's waiting for the opportunity to get his hands on our money and elope with the girl he's betting. Without me, Alfred will be left at the mercy of predators. The same way I was alone against the greedy nobles who showed their true colors when our house fell. Alicia Melfin said, "You're mistaken if you think I'll let you have your way." First, Alicia Melfin held her hand on table and said, "I'll need to go to Catham, the closest city from here. That's where the Ramdak Guild operates. And the money to cover the journey." Alicia Melfin said, "There it is. But I can't afford to travel alone in this state." Alicia Melfin came and said, "Excuse me, do you happen to know where I can find mercenaries for hire without paying in advance?" The old man asked, "What about your husband?" She thought husband. They said, "Speak of the devil." Noman picked her hands and said, "You must be famished, my love." Alicia Melfin said, "I had 3 pastries just now." "Wait, what did you call me?" Norman said, "Just get in the room." They glad and thought good times. Good times. To be young and in love, Norman said her. "I humbly beg your pardon, my lady." Alicia Melfin replied, "Yes, well, definitely more convenient than having to explain why we're traveling together. But I am a public figure, Sir Norman. This might start unnecessary gossip should we come across others who recognize me. Best we tell these people the truth, since we'll be going our separate ways." Norman said her, "We won't be going separate ways, my lady." Alicia Melfin shocked and asked, "What?" He said, "Please, allow me to escort you to your estate at the very least." Norman sit down and said her, "Please, allow me to escort you to your estate at the very least." Norman showed warm feelings and looked her, and thought having him watch my back would certainly put my mind at ease. But I can't afford to focus on personal safety at the moment. Getting the estate back under control is the top priority. Norman picked her arm and thought, and I need to do it fast. Alicia Melfin thought Norman, however, might prove an obstacle to that goal. The return of the firstborn son of House Diaz will invite public scrutiny, and scrutiny always entails accusation. On top of that, his handsome looks alone are enough to draw a crowd, and that's another complication I don't need. But really, it's his very existence that makes me uneasy. To me, he's the living reminder that the curse of the book is real. Alicia Melfin said, "You're making me uncomfortable." Norman said her. "Oh." Norman looked her face and said, "Let's drop the husband and wife act then. I'll be more careful in the future." "I swear it upon my honor," Alicia Melfin shouted and thought, "Yes, that's part of the problem, but," Alicia Melfin said, "No, you don't understand, Sir Norman." She also said that for the last 10 years, I have been restoring House Melfin by doing the work of a lowly merchant. Alicia Melfin picked a gold coins and thought our power no longer comes from lineage, but from trade and profit. We chose survival over the dignity of the aristocracy. Norman talked with them and thought they'll welcome back with open arms. But it's a different story for me. Alicia Melfin said, "Seeing you return in the company of the Witch of Melfin," she shouted and said, "will only give them more cause to hunt me down." Norman said her, "I understand." He also said that I admit I haven't been able to catch up with how much the world has changed over the last 10 years. She shouted and thought he sounds hurt. Norman said, "Let me go over what you just said." Alicia Melfin thought you need to go back to the Melfin estate swiftly, because there are those who seek to take its fortune for themselves. But going out there with me is likely to draw unwanted attention and delay your return. You're also concerned about the rumors it might start. Correct. Norman picked a bag and said her, "Then allow me to convince you of the advantages instead." "May I?" Alicia Melfin replied. Sure. Norman smiled and said, "Excellent." He said her, "Now, I am the perfect bodyguard for you, because you won't find anyone as strong and athletic as me. I was in top form in terms of fitness when I was sealed in that spring 10 years ago. And for some reason, that hasn't changed at all. Alicia Melfin strange and thought, is he bragging, or what? Norman said her, my physical prowess is far superior compared to other men your age. Even the best mercenary money can buy has nothing on me. He smiled and said, I knew you'd agree. Your silence says it all. Secondly, Norman said her, I am experienced in both direct combat and delicate operations that require subterfuge. All I need is a simple hood. That's how I blend in. She thought nobody gave me a second glance when I was shopping for groceries at the local market square. Norman also said, I can also handle any emergencies that may arise and quickly put you out of harm's way. Some missions require disguise and acting skills. A loving husband, for example. Alicia Melfin picked him and said, enough already. I get it. Alicia Melfin surprised and said him, all right, let's assume you're as good as you claim. Norman locked and said her, oh, but I wasn't making any claims. I was only stating the fact. Interesting choice of word, my lady, she said. Try to put yourself in my shoes and think about how you sound. Norman said her, oh, was I not persuasive enough? She said him, you were. But I can't help but wonder why you're so eager to travel with me. Norman looked shocked and said her, I am a paladin of the Luthen's empire. I am duty-bound to protect the children of the goddess. Alicia Melfin said him, if doing Mara's work is what you want, you can always go to the slums. He said her, you forget, my lady, that I owe you my life. She replied, yes, well, I did pull you out of that spring. But anyone could have done. He said her, it's more than that. You saved my soul. She asked. I. What? Norman said her, my body was indeed confined within the spring of sealing. He thought, but my soul was drowning deeper and deeper into the abyss beyond the physical plane. Alicia Melfin asked, the abyss. Norman said her, I owe you not only my life but my soul as well. It's a personal wish of mine to escort you to the Melfin estate. And see you return to your rightful place. Alicia Melfin stretched and thought, so please, give me a chance to repay your kindness. Alicia Melfin picked his hands and said, very well. I suppose I can give you a chance. Norman smiled and said, my lady. Alicia Melfin expressed her feelings and said, let's seal it on paper then. A bodyguard contract. Norman replied, contract. Alicia Melfin said, yes. Your point about the benefits of traveling together is valid, but there are still some potential risks that warrant discussion. It's written contracts that prevent parties from acting in bad faith, not smiles and handshakes. Alicia Melfin said, let's play safe. For both our sakes. Alicia Melfin also asked him, you disagree? Norman closed her one eye and said, apologies. It's just the way you phrased it. She said, I fail to see what's so amusing. Norman said her, it's a rare thing to see one so well versed in the ways of the world. She said him, the best possible flattery for Alicia. Alicia Melfin asked, shall I draft the contract, then? Norman pointed his finger and said, of course not, my lady. We do it together, with the interests of both parties laid out. He also said her, thank you for your hospitality. We'll make sure to return the favor when the time is right. They said them, safe journey. Old man said, this brings back memories. Other old man said, you were never that handsome when you were young. Point 1. This contract is made and entered into between Alicia Melfin, Party A, and Norman Diaz, Party B. Norman said her, try to relax a little more, my lady. We'll draw needless attention at this rate. Upon arrival at the Melfin estate, Party A shall compensate Party B within 30 days for services provided. The sum shall be calculated based on number of days worked. He picked her hand and said, and we should be holding hands like real spouses. Point 2. Party A shall assume disguises whenever Party B deems it necessary. She looked him and said, am I supposed to help you cover your face too? 3. Party B shall mask his face and body in outdoor settings. Norman said her while he hugged her few. Now I'm glad I agreed to sign the contract. Point 4. Upon his honor as a paladin of Mara, Party B shall protect Party A with his life. Alicia Melfin said him, you worry too much. That was just a local passing through. He said, looks like we're here. Thule Market Square, on the road to Catham. Alicia Melfin saw a diamond ring and said, you want to sell this trinket? Goldsmith man checked and said him. He glanced and said, 1 gold is probably the best I can do. Alicia Melfin said the gemstone adorning that earring was purchased by the Ramdak Guild and polished by the best gemcutter in the Imperial City. She also said aggressively, and you're offering 1 gold for it? He asked her why you're with Ramdak. Alicia Melfin said, shopkeeper, if that's really your best offer, then I'll take it. But consider this your last transaction with us. Because Ramdak won't be supplying its goods to this establishment in the future. He thought so. What's it going to be? He shouted and said, in that case, I'll have to go above the market rate, just for you. She thought I became a merchant and learned the tricks of my trade, solely for the restoration of House Melfant and its people. Peasants who had no choice but to come back to the forsaken ruins they once called home. Servant, said her Lady Alicia. Servant, worry, and said her, oh, look at you. You must have been through so much, she thought. Despairing servants who managed to escape death only by pure luck. All of those lives rested on my shoulders. She arrived and said, hello. I come on behalf of the Ramdak Guild. Alicia Melfant thought I was this frail and sickly daughter of a noble family, who could do little else but ride around the estate within the safety of a carriage. A wide-eyed little girl in an unforgiving world. He looked her and locked and said, never heard of the name, to be honest. Is this wine even safe to drink? We'll consider buying some if you can finish a bottle right here. He asked Ramdak. What's that? She said, they say it's a new trading guild formed by some noble lady. What a joke. She thought, but one had no time to bemoan my fate, for my enemies were poverty and starvation. He asked, are you all right, my lady? She said, I did it. He asked, my lady? Alicia Melfant looked and said, they agreed to buy our goods, honor, dignity. Only after casting that nonsense aside was I able to ensure the survival of my people. Norman said, her, you look deep in thought. Is something the matter? She looked the shopkeeper and said, I'm hoping the proprietor is a blabbermouth. Shopkeeper stands up and said, her air. Is there anything else I can help you with? Alicia Melfant said, if rumors about me are going to spread no matter what, I'd prefer them to be in my favor. She also said, spread the word that Alicia Melfant is headed to Catham. Tell them Ramdak's guildmaster is back. Alicia Melfant sat on the chair and said, phew. What a long day. Norman said, her, we don't have enough money to afford a place to stay. Alicia Melfant said him, we could try getting lodgings on credit, but as the leader of Ramdak, I cannot let my private actions hurt the reputation of the guild. She also said him, we'll have to camp out in the open until we reach Catham. My guild members will help once we get there. She be me happy and said, besides, I'd prefer to use my money where I know I can get quality service instead of throwing it away on crummy places. Norman said, trade hubs like Catham tend to attract criminals. He also said, her, we should send a courier to your knights so they know when to expect you. She looked worried and said, House Melfant no longer commands any knights. She thought our chivalric tradition ended on that fateful night 10 years ago. Our knights were decimated, and nobody wanted to swear fealty to a fallen noble house in a blighted land. Norman became worried and said, her. Alicia Melfant said him, it's okay. We managed to rise from the ashes even without our knights. He said, her, thanks to Ramdak. No doubt. Alicia Melfant said, tell them Ramdak's guildmaster is back. She glad and said, so embarrassing. He said, her, indeed. The guild is the milk and honey of House Melfant now. He also asked, how did you start off as a merchant? Alicia Melfant asked. With lotus flowers. He said, lotus? Alicia Melfant said him, the blight spreading through our lands had ruined our harvests and killed our craftsmen. Alicia Melfant thought, but just when I thought we'd finally exhausted our options, something caught my eye. Lotus flowers on the lake. Lotus leaves are excellent for making tea, and the stalks can be sold as fuel. Alicia Melfant thought, however, peddling tea and fuel was far from enough to bring our house back on its feet. And so we found a more profitable use of those flowers, lotus wine. A unique drink that can only be brewed by House Melfant. That's how we became the first noble house in history to form a trading guild. And through our aggressive business practices, we amassed a fortune beyond imagination. Then we reinvested the gold in other ventures to make even more profit. Land, property, jewels, sellswords, and privateers to protect our people and our fleet of merchant vessels. Alicia Melfant having a breakfast and said to the public, I'm a heartless, money-hungry witch. People whisper behind my back at every party I attend. You could say I traded away my honor and reputation in return for money. Alicia Melfant strange and thought that explains why she's so experienced in worldly matters at such a young age, and sensitive when it comes to rumors. Norman said, the way I see it, chasing profit to keep the people well fed is far more honorable than upholding the pride of the nobility without doing anything for those in need. Alicia Melfant smiled and drank milk and said, I stopped caring about honor and dignity a long time ago. He said, ugh. That vile harpy. She thought, isn't that Ramdak's guildmaster? The wench who got killed at the festival. Well, she seems to be alive and kicking. What's she doing here? He smiled and said I could recognize those purple eyes a mile off. She's using that guild of hers to get her claws into Catham. A real nuisance. She said, aren't highborns supposed to be holed up in their estates, reading books and drinking tea? She's got no business robbing us of our livelihoods. Alicia Melfin shouted and thought, well, they're not wrong. I've always been prepared to face this sort of insult. I'm a contender in the eyes of other merchants, and a pariah to the nobility. Alicia Melfin thought a wine-selling noble is friend to none. He said, doesn't matter what she is. The goddess frowns on her. He lauded and said, yeah, I've heard the story about the Melfins. I bet there are dozens of ghosts haunting her. But there's one very important thing I've overlooked. She said the wench should have died with her family that day. He thought that I was in the company of the sleeping prince. You don't want to rub the wrong way. Alicia Melfin said, ignore them, Sir Norman. I'm used to people talking behind my back. It's all right. Norman said, no, it's not. She said, Sir Norman. He shouted and said, it's not all right at all. Not one bit. He punched him and he said, Gah. Alicia Melfin looked strange and thought they can't even put up a proper fight. All bark and no bite, these people. But a tavern brawl, huh? Darn it, this could get us in trouble. Alicia Melfin shouted and said, them enough. You're going to kill the man at this rate. I told you I'm all right, Norman said her, but you're not. He looked her and said, you're not all right at all. Alicia Melfin picked him and said, come. We're leaving. Norman said, these scums will learn not to run their MOU. Alicia Melfin said, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You stubborn imbecile. T shouted and said, you. That's my friend you're roughing up. Alicia Melfin looked them and said, come with me now, or I'm leaving you here. She shouted and said, they're getting away. He said after them, he said her, you're gasping for breath, my lady? He asked, are you sure you're all right? Alicia Melfin shouted and thought, I already told him I'm fine. Why is he throwing such a fuss about it? This is a breach of contract. I'm going to cut this from his pay for the day. And that's not even close to the damage he's done. He said her, please, my lady, slow down. You'll end up making yourself sick. Alicia Melfin shouted on him and said, I'm tired of your constant fussing. Alicia Melfin said him, there, I said it. Are you going to take a swing at me too? Norman raised his hand and said, of course not. Why would I do such a thing? Alicia Melfin said him, well, the noble scion of House Diaz has made it clear that he can't stand rude language. What's stopping you from giving me a whack across the face? Norman said her, I'm sorry if my behavior back at the tavern offended you. But as a paladin, I couldn't let them get away with their discourtesy. Alicia Melfin very angry and said, and where's the F*** point in that? Alicia Melfin also said those lowlifes weren't wrong. Alicia Melfin said, Alicia Melfin is a shame to the nobility. A wine-selling wench who threw away her dignity for money. He said her, I can't go along with the awful things they said to you. He also said the same way I refused to believe the dark words that the curse whispered into my ears. Every moment I had to spend in that spring was filled with voices that called for my death. He said, I thought ignoring them would make things all right. But no. She said the wench should have died with her family that day. She thought day after day of hearing that abuse. They locking and said everything will be perfect without you, Norman. Norman thought slowly led me to believe I was better off dead. Before long, it wasn't the voices, but my own self that sought to kill me. Alicia Melfin shouted and thought. My own self. Alicia Melfin said him, you're a formidable person, my lady. Norman said her, unlike me. Norman said her, but no matter how strong you are, he said her, the wounds inflicted by the words of others won't simply disappear on their own. Norman said her, don't let them do this to you. Alicia Melfin said, very well. She also said that I will try to stop putting myself down going forward, so you should make an effort to keep your temper in check as well. She said, promise? Norman replied, promise. Alicia Melfin looked him and said, anyhow, since those thugs might come after us, I suggest we travel through the woods until we reach Catham. Damn it, camping outside again. Norman looked and said, the sky's full of stars tonight, my lady. He said her, and you'll see this beautiful night sky again in the safety of your estate. He looked her and said, Lady Alicia. Alicia Melfin looked him and said, nothing escapes your keen senses, I see. He said her bodyguards must always be ready for enemy attack. Alicia Melfin asked, constant vigilance, is it? Norman shouted and said, you sleep like a rock though. And you snore. Alicia Melfin glad and said I was jesting. He said her I think you're way more prepared for the journey than I am, my lady. She thought, you flatter. She said him in any case. Alicia, Melfin also said we'll no longer be wearing down the soles of our boots. Norman looked and said Romback banners. He said her when he had a bags. I didn't expect we'd run into your guild members so soon. Heaven itself must be watching over you. Alicia Melfin said him heaven aids no one, Sir Norman. Not me. At least. Alicia Melfin also said besides I'd turn down the help anyway. I am the only one who can help me. Alicia Melfin shouted and said stop the carriage, Stan. He said her I know you can hear me. Knight said her that's Madam Stan to you, woman. You are in the way of Romback's acting guildmaster. He said wait. Stan, acting guildmaster of Romback Traders Guild. He shouted and said I thought we truly lost you this time. Can't you see I'm sitting right here? He hugged her and said oh my poor lady Alicia. Have you been eating properly, child? You're all skin and bones. I've been stuffing myself full with pastries. Norman looked and thought she seems like a good person. He asked him. What's that sparkle? He said her I must say, my lady. Drop that weasel Philip and go for this one instead. Alicia Melfin shouted and said him Stan. Please. And it's more folk, she thought. Come to think of it, she thought I have no further need for a bodyguard now that Stan and Romback's guards are here. Stan said her good. He's got all the bits I like to see on a man. She thought traveling with him would only invite unnecessary trouble. She said Sir Norman, more folks said we'll ready a horse or a carriage for you to ensure your swift return to your family. Norman looked surprised and said my lady? He said him this seems to be a good time to terminate our contract.